She was a police officer, sworn to protect and serve, but in one shocking night, she became the killer. When Yvonne Clarke walked into her kitchen and found her 16-year-old daughter and 18-year-old stepson in a moment no mother should ever witness, something inside her snapped. What followed was a storm of rage, betrayal, and blood that tore her family apart forever. This is the chilling story of how a mother turned her service weapon on her own children, and why the truth behind it still leaves an entire community in disbelief. Welcome to True Crime's Altar, where every sin is punished, every betrayal has a cost, and every soul must answer to the truth. Like, comment, and subscribe, because these are the stories the guilty prayed would stay buried. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the kitchen, its low buzz filling the silence until it was broken by the sharp clatter of a glass, slipping from nervous fingers and shattering across the tiled floor. Tiny fragments scattered like glitter, catching the dull light above, but neither of the two teenagers standing by the counter flinched at the sound. They were too close to each other, their attention locked. 16-year-old Leanna Jefferson's braids brushed against her shoulders as she shifted closer, her dark eyes wide with something that was not fear, but the dangerous thrill of being sane. Beside her, 19-year-old Malik Carter, tall with a lean build and the faint shadow of a beard along his jaw, leaned against the edge of the counter, his voice low, his words meant for no one but her. "You know we can't keep doing this here," he whispered, his hand brushing against hers. The movement was subtle but intimate, his thumb lingering too long over her fingers. Leanna's lips parted as if to respond, but instead a soft laugh slipped out, nervous and giddy, the kind of sound that made the air in the room feel charged. The laugh bounced off the walls, mixing with the hum of the appliances. That was when the front door opened. The metallic jingle of keys hitting the hallway table should have been enough to break the spell, but neither of them reacted. Their voices stayed hushed, their bodies drawn close by the kind of pull that ignores reason. The quiet footsteps moving through the living room carried a weight that belonged to a woman who knew how to enter a room without being heard. Sergeant Patrice Jefferson had spent nearly 2 decades on the force. She was a woman shaped by long nights, dangerous streets, and the cold discipline of survival. Her boots tracked in the faint smell of rain, her badge pressed cold against her chest, and her service weapon hung heavy at her hip. The house should have been silent. The muffled laughter drifting from the kitchen was unexpected, unusual enough to make her pause in the shadows of the doorway. She leaned forward and looked in. Her world split apart in one breath. There, under the glow of the kitchen light, her daughter and her husband's son stood too close, their bodies angled with a familiarity that was never meant to exist. Malik's face tilted down, his lips lowering toward Liana's, and Liana's chin lifted, eyes closing with anticipation. Patrice froze, her entire body stiffening as though the air itself had turned to ice. For a single moment, she thought her eyes betrayed her, that exhaustion was playing tricks on her. But then Malik's hand cupped the side of Liana's face, and everything in Patrice's chest shattered at once. Her voice, sharp and cutting, broke the air like shattered glass. "What the hell is going on here?" The teenagers jumped apart as if burned, the space between them suddenly a chasm of fear. Liana's eyes widened in horror, her lips trembling. Malik's mouth opened, words stuck in his throat, his guilty stare betraying every secret they thought they had hidden. "Mom, it's not what it looks like," Liana started, but her voice cracked, weak and unconvincing. Malik stepped forward as though shielding her. His voice trembled. "It's not what you think." Patrice's hand shook as she pointed a finger at them, her voice trembling with disbelief and rage. "My daughter, my husband's son, in my house, under my roof." Her breathing grew ragged, the betrayal burning through her veins. Liana reached out, tears flooding her eyes. "Please, Mom, listen," but Patrice's hand had already moved to her holster. The smooth, cold grip of the pistol pressed into her palm, a weight she had carried for years on the streets but had never imagined turning on her own. The metallic click echoed as the weapon slid free. Malik's hand shot up in panic, his voice breaking. "Please, Sergeant Jefferson, Patrice, don't do this." The sound of her name from his lips was a dagger. Even as his body shook, his tone still carried that familiarity she now saw as betrayal. Patrice's vision blurred with rage, a haze of red flooding her eyes. Her grip tightened, her arms steady though her body trembled. The gunshot exploded through the kitchen, shattering the glass cabinet behind Malik. He staggered back, the crimson blooming across his chest before his body crumpled to the floor. The thud of his fall shook the tiles, his blood spreading like spilled paint across the white floor. Liana screamed, a raw, piercing sound that clawed through Patrice's ears and ripped her heart. The girl dropped to her knees beside Malik, her trembling hands trying to stop the bleeding, her sobs broken and frantic. "Mom, please, no." Patrice's arms shook, her chest heaving, but her training overpowered her hesitation. The weapon lifted again almost of its own accord. The second shot rang out, louder than the first, filling the house with deafening finality. The scream ended abruptly. Liana's body collapsed across Malik's, their blood mingling into one dark pool that crept across the tile toward her mother's boots. Silence settled like a suffocating blanket. Patrice's ears still rang with the echo of the shots, her pulse pounding so hard she thought her chest would tear open. The weapon slipped from her hands and clattered against the counter. She pressed trembling palms to her face, her breath ragged, her shoulders shaking. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the metallic stench of blood, filling her lungs until she thought she would choke. Her gaze drifted back to the floor. Her daughter's braids, once neat and full of life, now matted with blood. Malik's face pale, his lifeless eyes staring at nothing. They were supposed to be children under her care, protected by her badge, her oath, her motherhood. Instead, they lay dead at her feet, silenced by her hand. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked wildly at the echoes of gunfire. Somewhere down the block, sirens wailed, their pitch rising as they drew closer. Patrice staggered backward, her shoulder hitting the wall. The reality of what she had done closed in like a vice, her chest tightening, her vision swimming. She was no longer a decorated officer, no longer the mother who worked endless shifts to provide. In that kitchen, surrounded by shattered glass and spreading blood, she was only a murderer waiting to be caught. Detective Aaron Whitfield adjusted his tie as he stepped under the yellow tape stretched across the Jefferson residence. The smell of iron hit him the moment he entered the kitchen, and he stopped in his tracks, his eyes scanning the scene that already looked like something torn out of a nightmare. Two young bodies lay on the cold, tiled floor, their blood mingled into one dark pool, streaks spreading toward the edges of the cabinets. Liana Jefferson, 16, a high school junior. Malik Carter, 19, her stepbrother, both shot at close range. Forensics were already at work, cameras flashing, evidence markers scattered like confetti across the blood-stained tiles. Whitfield crouched beside the girl's body, his jaw tightening. She was still dressed in her school clothes, a loose sweater with the school emblem stitched on the sleeve. A silver bracelet clung to her wrist, smeared with blood. His eyes moved to the boy beside her, taller, his frame slumped against the base of the counter, one hand frozen in the motion of reaching toward her. Detective Sonia Keller, his partner, stepped in behind him. "What do we know?" she asked, flipping open her notebook. Whitfield stood slowly, running a hand over his jaw. 2 gunshot victims. Neighbors reported shots around 8:30. Patrol responded within minutes. They found Sergeant Patrice Jefferson in the living room. Wait. Keller's brows lifted. Sergeant Jefferson? As in one of ours? Whitfield nodded grimly. 20 years on the force. Responding officers said she was still in uniform, weapon on the table, claimed she came home from shift and found them like this. Keller's pen scratched against the page. She says she didn't hear the shots? She says she walked in and, quote, the devil had already been through here. His tone was flat. Keller exhaled slowly, her eyes traveling back to the scene. And she didn't call it in? No, Whitfield replied, lowering his voice. Neighbor across the street called 911 after hearing gunfire. That's why we're here. A crime scene tech interrupted, holding up a clear evidence bag. "Detectives, you'll want to see this. Service weapon registered to Patrice Jefferson. Recently fired. 2 shells missing." Keller took the bag, her lips pressing into a hard line. She glanced at Whitfield. "This isn't looking good." They moved into the living room, where Patrice sat on the couch, her uniform shirt stained at the collar with sweat, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles were bone white. Her eyes were red, but no tears fell. She looked up as the detectives entered, her expression unreadable. Whitfield introduced himself, voice measured. "Sergeant Jefferson, I know this is difficult, but we need to ask you some questions." Patrice straightened, her tone clipped, rehearsed almost. "I came home after shift, walked into the kitchen, found them like that. I never touched my weapon. Whoever did this must have used mine, then put it back." Keller exchanged a quick glance with Whitfield, but kept her voice calm. "Your neighbors reported hearing shouting before the shots. Do you know anything about that?" Patrice's gaze flickered, the first crack in her composure. "Teenagers argue. You know how it is. But when I walked in, they were already—" Her voice faltered before she steadied it, "gone." Keller leaned forward slightly. "Sergeant, did your daughter or stepson mention any trouble lately? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt them?" Patrice's lips tightened. "My daughter kept to herself. Malik, too. Good kids. They didn't deserve this." Her eyes dropped to her hands. "I should have been here." Whitfield watched her closely. Something about her words felt off, rehearsed rather than raw. His gut told him she was holding back. In the corner, an officer whispered to another, too low for her to hear, "She's lying." Later outside, Whitfield stood beneath the porch light, his partner beside him. The air was cold, carrying the murmur of neighbors gathered across the street, their faces pale with shock. Keller closed her notebook. "She's not telling us everything. A mother finds her daughter and stepson shot in her kitchen, but she doesn't scream, doesn't call it in, doesn't fall apart." Whitfield's eyes remained fixed on the house. She's a cop. She knows what panic looks like. She's trying too hard not to show it. A patrol officer approached, holding a plastic bag. Inside lay 2 cell phones, cracked and spattered with blood. "We recovered these near the counter. One's Malik's, one's Liana's. Data might tell us something." Whitfield nodded. "Send them to tech. I want every message, every call log." Keller closed her coat against the chill. "So what's your gut?" Whitfield's jaw tightened. "My gut says this wasn't a break-in. It wasn't random. Whoever pulled that trigger was someone they knew." He looked back at the glowing windows of the Jefferson home. "And right now, the only person standing in this house with gunpowder on her hands is their mother." Detective Whitfield returned to the station early the next morning, the evidence board already crowded with photos of the Jefferson kitchen. 2 young faces stared back at him, Liana Jefferson and Malik Carter, both frozen in the prime of youth, their lives cut short in the most violent way possible. Red string linked their pictures to evidence bags, the recovered phones, the blood-stained kitchen tiles, and a bagged service weapon marked property of Sergeant Patrice Jefferson. Keller walked in holding 2 steaming coffees, her eyes heavy with fatigue. "Autopsy's in," she said, sliding a file across the table. "Both victims shot at close range. Malik first, chest wound. Liana second, neck and upper chest. No defensive wounds, no sign of struggle. Straight execution." Whitfield grimaced, flipping the pages. "Means they trusted the shooter. They didn't think they'd need to fight back." Keller leaned against the desk. "And the GSR test came back positive. Patrice had gunshot residue on her right hand." Whitfield shut the folder slowly, his eyes dark. "She said she never touched her weapon." Keller's voice dropped. "We've all heard stories. Cops who hold it together on the job, but lose it at home. 20 years on the street, carrying the weight of everyone else's tragedy. Maybe this one snapped." Whitfield shook his head. "Maybe. But what was the trigger? Why now?" That question lingered as they returned to the Jefferson home. The house smelled faintly of bleach, as if someone had tried to scrub away what had happened, though the kitchen tiles still bore the faint outline of stains. Upstairs, Liana's room offered the first real glimpse into her world. Posters of R&B artists lined the walls, a makeup mirror cluttered with lip glosses and hair beads, school books open on the desk. Nothing suggested a troubled teen, but Whitfield's eyes caught on a small notebook wedged beneath the mattress. He flipped it open carefully, scanning the neat handwriting. Pages filled with song lyrics, doodles of hearts, scribbled initials, LJ and MC. His stomach tightened. MC Malik Carter. Keller leaned over his shoulder, her face tightening. They were close. Whitfield flipped another page, reading aloud. He says I'm special. He makes me feel alive. Nobody understands, not even Mom. She wouldn't approve, but we can't stop. Keller exhaled sharply. My God, she was talking about him. Downstairs, Malik's room was sparse, clothes folded in neat stacks, a few college pamphlets scattered across his desk. But hidden inside a drawer was a photo, Liana smiling, her arms slung around his shoulders, the kind of picture that looked less like siblings and more like something forbidden. Whitfield bagged it silently. Back at the station, the lab tech waved them over. We pulled some deleted messages from Liana's phone, she explained, scrolling on her monitor. Most were between her and Malik. Lots of late-night chats. You're not gonna like this. On the screen, a message thread appeared. Liana, she'll never understand. She'll destroy us if she finds out. Malik, we just need to be careful. Nobody has to know. We'll figure out a way. Keller leaned back in her chair, her lips tightening. So Patrice walked in on this. Not rumors, not suspicion. She saw it with her own eyes. Whitfield rubbed a hand over his face. And instead of stopping them, she pulled the trigger. The detectives knew what came next. They needed to confront her again. In the interrogation room, Patrice sat stiffly, her uniform replaced with plain clothes. She still carried herself like a cop, her back straight, eyes steady, but her hands betrayed her, clasped tight, knuckles white. Whitfield laid the photo and notebook on the table. We searched Liana and Malik's rooms. We found this. And we recovered their texts. They weren't just kids under the same roof. They were involved. You knew, didn't you? Patrice's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Keller's voice softened. You walked in on them. That's why there's no forced entry, no struggle. That's why your prints are on the gun. Patrice finally lifted her eyes, sharp and burning. Don't sit there and tell me you understand, she hissed. Don't tell me you know what it feels like to walk into your kitchen and see your child, your only child, being touched like that. By him. Her voice cracked on the last word, her shoulders trembling. Whitfield held her gaze. So you killed them? Patrice's silence was louder than any confession. In the quiet, the clock on the wall ticked steady, each second dragging the truth closer to the surface. The rain hadn't stopped all day, a thin drizzle streaking the glass walls of the precinct as Detective Whitfield sifted through the growing mountain of evidence. The board in front of him was no longer a puzzle of disconnected pieces. It was a story forming, jagged and raw, one that pointed relentlessly back to the same conclusion. Patrice Jefferson was no grieving mother. She was their killer. Keller walked in holding a fresh report. Forensics confirmed it, she said flatly. The blood under Liana's nails doesn't belong to Malik. It belongs to Patrice. She tried to fight back. Whitfield stared at the photographs pinned to the board. Liana's lifeless body sprawled on the kitchen floor. So the daughter fought her mother, he said quietly. Even in her last seconds, she tried. Keller placed another folder on the desk. And Tech finished pulling everything from Malik's phone. There's more. She opened the file, revealing printed transcripts of messages. Malik, she's going to find out. We can't keep this up forever. Liana, I don't care if she does. I love you. I won't let her control me. Keller shook her head slowly. They weren't just reckless. They were planning something. Maybe to leave. Maybe to force her to accept it. Whitfield exhaled, his shoulders tight. And she couldn't live with it. Not as a mother. Not as a cop. Later that evening, the detectives returned to the Jefferson house one more time. The kitchen was sealed off, evidence tags everywhere, but Whitfield wanted to walk the space again. He crouched by the counter where Malik had fallen, the stain of his blood still faintly visible through the bleach. He imagined the shouting, the pleas, the moment the gun was raised. He stood slowly, eyes sweeping the room, until something caught his attention near the laundry basket tucked in the corner. He pulled on gloves and lifted the lid. Beneath a pile of folded towels was a crumpled sheet of paper, stained faintly pink. He smoothed it open carefully. It was a letter, the handwriting unmistakably Liana's. "Mom, if you find this, I need you to know the truth. I love him. You don't understand, but we were meant to be. We wanted to tell you. We wanted you to see it wasn't wrong. Please don't hate us." Whitfield read it twice, his throat dry. Keller leaned over his shoulder. She was going to confess. She did confess, Whitfield muttered, and Patrice read it. They bagged the letter and returned to the station. By nightfall, the case against Patrice was ironclad. DNA, messages, her weapon, and now her daughter's own words. Yet Whitfield knew evidence wasn't enough. They needed her to say it. The interrogation room was dim, the hum of the overhead light filling the silence as Patrice sat across from them. Her face was drawn, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but her jaw was still clenched with defiance. Whitfield laid the letter on the table between them. "She wrote this for you. Did you ever read it?" Patrice's eyes flickered to the paper, then back to him. She said nothing. Keller leaned forward. "She loved him. You couldn't accept it, so you killed them both. Not in the line of duty, not a fight you couldn't control. In your kitchen, with your own weapon." Patrice's hands trembled, her nails digging into her palms. "Stop," she whispered. Whitfield didn't flinch. "You walked in. You saw them. You pulled the trigger. Twice. That's what happened, isn't it?" Her breathing grew ragged, her chest heaving. For a moment, it seemed she might break down, but instead she slammed her palms against the table, her voice sharp and cracked. "I did what any mother would do." The room fell silent. The weight of her words hung heavy, undeniable. Keller's pen scratched once across her notebook, sealing the moment. Patrice Jefferson had just confessed. The morning broke gray and heavy, the kind of sky that pressed low over the city, mirroring the weight hanging inside the precinct. Detective Whitfield sat with his elbows on the table, staring at the board crowded with evidence. Patrice Jefferson's face was pinned at the center now, a photo from her personnel file, her eyes sharp in uniform, her badge gleaming. Around it clustered everything they had: the recovered weapon, the autopsy reports, the text messages, and Liana's heartbreaking letter. Keller walked in carrying a stack of papers. "Surveillance footage from the neighbor across the street came in," she said, sliding the USB onto the desk. They loaded it up, the grainy footage flickering on screen. At 8:05 p.m., Patrice was visible returning home in uniform. At 8:17, the faint glow of light in the kitchen window. At 8:21, a sudden flash, a muzzle flare, and then another. Keller folded her arms. "That's it. Timeline's tight. There's no room for another suspect. It was her." Whitfield leaned back, sighing. "And she lied straight to our faces. Said she came home and found them. But she was the one pulling the trigger." He rubbed his temples. "We've got to take this to the DA." Later that afternoon, Patrice was escorted back into interrogation, her wrists cuffed this time. She sat down slowly, her expression a brittle mask of control. Whitfield dropped the folder in front of her, the sound sharp in the small room. "Surveillance. Forensics. Your daughter's blood under your nails. Your gun. Your confession. Everything points to you." Patrice stared at the folder, her lips tight, refusing to speak. Keller's voice cut in, low and steady. Patrice, you wore that badge for 20 years. You know the system. You know once this goes to trial, the evidence will bury you. If there's anything left to say, now's the time. For the first time since her arrest, Patrice's composure cracked. Her eyes glistened, her voice breaking as she whispered, "She was my baby, and he was supposed to be my son. I gave them a home. I gave them everything, and they betrayed me in the worst way possible." She swallowed hard, her hands trembling against the cuffs. I walked in and saw them, like lovers. Do you know what that does to a mother? Do you know what it does to a wife? It felt like my whole life had been spat on. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Her words spilled faster, the dam breaking. I didn't mean to. I didn't plan it. But when I saw them touching each other, smiling like I was the fool, something inside me snapped. And by the time I came back to myself, they were gone. Keller's eyes hardened. "So you killed your daughter and your stepson because you couldn't stand the truth." Patrice's voice rose, filled with a raw mixture of rage and grief. "Because they destroyed everything I built. My marriage, my name, my family, everything." She dropped her head into her hands, her shoulders shaking. Outside the room, Whitfield and Keller stepped into the hall, the door shutting behind them. Keller exhaled slowly. She'll never walk out of there again. Whitfield stared through the glass window at Patrice, slumped and broken. "She wore the same badge we do," he murmured. "But the moment she pulled that trigger, she crossed a line she can never come back from." Hours later, the paperwork was signed, the charges official: double homicide, use of a service weapon, obstruction for tampering with the scene. The case that had started in silence and shattered glass was barreling toward trial. And still, in the pit of Whitfield's stomach, there was no victory. Only the heavy truth that this was a family destroyed from within, and that justice could never bring back the dead. The courthouse steps were slick with rain as news cameras lined up in the gray morning light, their lenses aimed at the woman being led inside in handcuffs. Sergeant Patrice Jefferson, once a decorated officer praised for her discipline and service, now walked with her head bowed, her wrists bound, her uniform replaced with an orange jumpsuit. The crowd murmured in disbelief as reporters shouted questions, their voices drowned out by the clap of thunder overhead. Inside, the trial unfolded with the slow rhythm of inevitability. Witnesses testified, the neighbors who heard the shouting, the forensic experts who confirmed the DNA, the technicians who pulled the deleted messages and revealed the forbidden affair. Piece by piece, the case was laid bare until no doubt remained. Patrice had walked into her kitchen, discovered the secret between her daughter and her stepson, and allowed rage and betrayal to drive her to murder. When the jury returned, the courtroom held its breath. Guilty on all counts. Patrice did not cry. She sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on a point no one else could see, as though she had left the room long before the verdict was read. Detective Whitfield sat in the back, watching the collapse of a woman who had once worn the same badge as him. He felt no triumph, only the weight of another tragedy where justice could not mend what had been broken. 2 young lives had been erased, and a mother had destroyed herself in the process. Outside, as Patrice was led away to begin her sentence, the rain finally eased, leaving the air heavy with silence. Whitfield turned his collar up and walked toward his car, the words of Keller echoing in his mind. Some crimes are born not out of cold blood, but out of love twisted into obsession and family ties that turn into chains. He thought of Liana and Malik, of the future they would never see, of the dangerous line between passion and destruction. He thought of Patrice, who had spent her life protecting others only to become the danger herself when she could not protect her own heart. And as the city lights flickered to life in the distance, Whitfield knew there were no winners here, only victims. If you've stayed with this story to the end, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about the choices made and the tragedy that followed? Leave us a comment with your opinion, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and tell us where in the world you're watching from.